confessed killer walks into court for his sentencing. The 19-year-old pleaded guilty in November to killing 36-year-old Ashia Davis, a transgender woman of color, in her room at the Woodward Inn in Highland Park on June 1st of 2023.
Her beautiful, infectious smile and bubbly personality was taken away from us on the first day of Pride.
Julissa Abad, trans advocate and friend of Ashia Davis, says just as Pride Month was getting underway, a celebration of the LGBTQ community, Ashia Davis was shot in the head. Video showed a man at the hotel running from her room.
Only 2 people were in that room that night, and we'll ever know the true events of what happened. What we will know is that Ashia Davis was shot execution style in the back of the head and left for dead.
Abad remembers racing to the scene when she found out a transgender woman had been killed, only to find out it was her friend.
The last memory that I have is seeing my friend on the floor outside of the hotel corner room with blood streaming all over the floor.
Months of investigation led to the arrest of Carlos Scotland, who was just 17 at the time of the crime. Abad says the stigma surrounding the transgender community leads to homelessness, unemployment, and too many people are forced to turn to sex work to make money.
The sad reality is, particularly in the Black and brown community, men that are enamored with trans women cannot be themselves and have to resort to loving us in private and killing us in public, then have anybody know of their association with us.
Abad says Ashia Davis had hopes and dreams. She was studying to be a nurse, but Carlos Scotland took that all away, pleading guilty to second-degree murder, sentenced to 17 to 30 years behind bars.
He's being held accountable for the crime that he did, so for that I am grateful. I want my community to continue to be vigilant and come forward and report these crimes so that we can continue.
It was the first day of June, 2023, the first day of Pride Month. Across the country, rainbow flags were rising in celebration of love and identity. But in a quiet corner of Highland Park, Michigan, as the city lights dimmed, another story was unfolding, one of silence, fear, and tragedy. Inside a modest hotel off Woodward Avenue, a woman named Ashia Davis was preparing for the next chapter of her life. She had recently graduated from nursing school, her future bright and full of promise. Friends called her Charm, a name that fit the warmth she carried wherever she went. That night, the Woodward Inn was still. Neon light flickered through the rain-streaked windows. A television hummed faintly in the background. Ashia, dressed simply, carried herself with quiet confidence. She was 34, strong, independent, and determined to live her truth in a world that too often punished women like her for simply existing. At around 10:45 p.m., security cameras caught her returning to her room, walking through the narrow outdoor hallway, unaware that someone was watching her. A few minutes later, another figure appeared on camera, a young man in dark clothing, moving quickly but casually, hands in pockets, glancing over his shoulder. He approached Ashia's room. He knocked. He entered. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The hallway was empty again, quiet except for the buzz of a flickering light. Then, at 11:16 p.m., the same figure was seen leaving the room, this time moving faster. Head down. Hands clenched. Gone before anyone noticed. Moments later, a gunshot echoed through the corridor. Guests called the front desk. A clerk, shaken, dialed 911. When police arrived, they found the door unlocked and the scene inside devastating. Ashia Davis lay on the floor, a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. She had been killed instantly. There were no signs of a struggle. No robbery. No reason. Just a life, full of light, extinguished in the dark. As the news broke, the horror rippled far beyond Highland Park. The killing of a transgender woman, on the first day of Pride, struck deep in the heart of a community already fighting to be seen and safe. Ashia's friends began to gather online, their grief pouring into posts and memories, stories of her laughter, her faith, her dreams. She had survived so much to live authentically, only to meet a death that felt senseless and cruel. By morning, candles flickered outside the hotel, a vigil born from heartbreak. A mother's only child was gone. And somewhere out there, her killer was still free. The celebration of Pride had begun with a murder. And in its shadow, one name began to echo across the country, Ashia Davis. Before the headlines, before the police tape, before her name became another statistic, there was simply Ashia. Born and raised in Detroit, she was known for her smile, the kind that made people feel seen, safe, and understood. Her friends called her charm because that's exactly what she embodied: grace, warmth, and a light that drew people in. Ashia grew up in a world that didn't always understand her. From a young age, she knew she was different, not in a way that could be hidden, but in a way that demanded courage. Living as a black transgender woman meant facing judgment, danger, and rejection from strangers, and sometimes even from people who claimed to love her. But Ashia refused to be defined by fear. She built herself from the ground up, piece by piece, through resilience and faith. She found comfort in her church, joy in her friends, and purpose in helping others. Her dream was to become a nurse, to heal people, to be the one who made others feel safe in a world that hadn't always done the same for her. By 2023, she had done it. She had just finished nursing school, a milestone she had fought for 3 years of hard work and self-belief. Her diploma symbolized more than education, it was proof that she could carve her own path. She had even been offered a new job, one that would finally give her stability and independence. Friends say she talked about getting her own place, about traveling, about taking her little Yorkie, Clyde, on adventures. She had so much to look forward to. In photos, she glows, long hair styled, bright makeup, her eyes alive with joy. She poses confidently, shoulders back, unapologetic. A woman who had learned to love herself in full color after years of being told she couldn't. But Ashia's story wasn't just one of survival, it was one of compassion. Those who knew her said she had an open heart, that she gave more than she had. She checked on people. She encouraged them. She reminded them that life, no matter how cruel, was still worth living. And that was the bitter tragedy, because she believed in healing, in humanity, in love. Even in a world that had too often shown her the opposite. When people spoke about her after her death, they didn't talk about how she died first, they talked about how she lived. Her faith. Her laughter. The way she made others feel beautiful, valued, safe. She was more than her gender, more than her struggle, more than the violence that would later define her in headlines. She was charm, a daughter, a friend, a dreamer. And she was finally stepping into the life she'd fought so long to have, until it was taken from her, on the first night of Pride. In the days leading up to her death, nothing seemed out of place. Ashia Davis was glowing. She had just landed a new nursing job, and friends said she couldn't stop smiling. She talked about the future, about finally getting her own place, about celebrating Pride the right way this year, free, confident, and surrounded by love. To anyone looking in, she seemed happy. But beneath the surface, there were subtle shifts, small, uneasy moments that no one thought much of until later. Ashia had been staying at the Woodward Inn in Highland Park, a modest, aging hotel with peeling paint and humming neon signs. It wasn't luxury, but it was temporary, a stopgap while she figured out her next steps. The place had a reputation. Locals knew it as somewhere you stayed if you didn't have better options. Still, Ashia wasn't the kind of woman who feared easily. She believed in second chances, in people, in places, in herself. But in the final week of May, something changed. Friends later recalled that she'd been distracted, her tone a little quieter, her messages shorter. No one thought much of it, everyone gets busy, but hindsight would turn those moments into warning signs. One of her closest friends, a woman she'd known for years, said Ashia mentioned someone new, someone she'd recently met. She didn't share much, just that he was young and rough around the edges. There's no proof that man was her killer, but investigators would later uncover surveillance footage that made the timing impossible to ignore. At around 10:57 p.m. on June 1st, a figure appeared on the motel's grainy security footage, a young man in dark clothing, walking alone through the courtyard. He didn't look lost. He looked like he knew exactly where he was going. He headed straight toward Ashia's room. The video showed him knocking once, then entering. 11 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, the same man emerged, moving faster, head down, one hand tucked tightly into his jacket. He left the way he came. Minutes later, someone inside the motel reported hearing what they thought was a pop. No one reacted right away. In a place like that, noise was part of the background, doors slamming, voices arguing, televisions humming behind thin walls. But when the front desk clerk finally went to check, the sight inside Ashia's room would stay with him forever. There were no signs of a struggle. No robbery. Her purse was still there. Her belongings untouched. Just silence, and tragedy. For police, it was a mystery. For her loved ones, it was a nightmare. Who was the man in the video? Why had he come? And why had the light that was Ashia Davis, a woman so full of love and hope, been extinguished without a sound? The red flags had always been there. No one could see them, until it was too late. The night of June 1, 2023, began like any other, humid air hanging over Detroit, the hum of distant traffic, the flicker of neon from the aging Woodward Inn sign cutting through the dark. For most guests, it was just another Thursday. But for Ashia Davis, it was the last night of her life. Inside her small hotel room, Ashia had settled in for the evening. The TV murmured softly in the background, the faint scent of her perfume still fresh in the air. On the table sat her phone, unlocked. Messages left unread. Plans never sent. At 10:57 p.m., a figure appeared on the motel's security footage, a young man, barely 17, walking with purpose through the courtyard. His name would later be revealed as Carlos Lamar Scotland. He wasn't a stranger to the streets. A teenager already hardened by the edges of life, carrying a gun, carrying secrets. The camera caught him glancing up once, his expression unreadable, before disappearing inside Ashia's room. What happened in the next 19 minutes has never been fully revealed. There was no audio. No witnesses. Only silence and a blurred reflection of movement through a thin motel curtain. But what we do know is chilling. At 11:16 p.m., the same figure emerged, moving faster. Head down. Hand inside his jacket. He didn't look back. Moments later, a muffled sound, sharp, metallic, rippled through the corridor. One single gunshot. Guests later told police they thought it was a firecracker, maybe a car backfiring outside. No one moved. No one screamed. The world kept turning, oblivious to the life ending just a few feet away. When the front desk clerk finally went to check, uneasy about the noise, he found Ashia's door slightly ajar. The lights inside were still on. The TV still playing. And there, on the floor beside the bed, lay Ashia. She'd been shot once, a clean, calculated wound to the back of her head. She hadn't had a chance to fight, to scream, to run. It was quick. Cold. Final. Her belongings were untouched. Her jewelry still on. Her purse zipped shut. Her phone, unlocked, blinking with an unread message from earlier that night. The crime made no sense. There was no sign of robbery, no evidence of forced entry. Whoever had come to that door, Ashia had let him in willingly. Police sealed off the scene, collecting fragments of a story they couldn't yet understand, a shell casing, fingerprints, faint smudges on the doorframe. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, steady, almost respectful in its timing. By dawn, word had spread. A woman, beautiful, kind, full of life, murdered in a motel room. But what made it even more gut-wrenching was the timing. Ashia was killed on the first day of Pride Month, a day meant to celebrate identity, love, and survival. And instead, it became the day her community lost one of its brightest voices. As detectives pieced together the puzzle, the surveillance footage became their key. The young man, the time stamps, the direction he fled. Within hours, they had a name. Within days, they had an arrest. The killer was 17. A boy. And he had stolen the life of a woman who had fought for years to live freely as herself. When officers broke the news to Ashia's mother, she didn't scream. She didn't speak. She just went silent, a silence so deep it carried more pain than words ever could. That night, candles flickered outside the Woodward Inn. Strangers gathered, praying, crying, whispering her name, Ashia Davis, into the dark. And somewhere in the distance, in a police station cell, a teenage boy sat quietly, staring at the floor. He had taken a life, and changed his own forever. When detectives arrived at the Woodward Inn, they stepped into silence. The smell of gunpowder still lingered faintly in the air, mingling with cheap cleaning supplies and motel dust. Ashia's body lay beside the bed, peaceful, almost asleep, but the stillness told the truth. This wasn't random. It was execution. The detectives began their work the way they always do, methodically, detached, their cameras flashing in the dim light. One shell casing. One bullet wound. No signs of a struggle. Her purse was untouched, money still inside. Jewelry remained on her wrists. There was no forced entry, no chaos, just precision. Whoever had come to that room, she had let them in. By morning, the police had already reviewed the surveillance footage. There he was, a young man in dark clothing entering her room at 10:57 p.m. and leaving just 19 minutes later. The timestamp didn't lie. The evidence was clean. The man's face was caught, blurry, but distinct enough. And within 24 hours, detectives had a name, Carlos Lamar Scotland, 17 years old. He didn't run far. Police found him less than 5 miles away, still in Highland Park. He wasn't hiding, not really. It was as if he didn't think he'd be caught. When they stopped him, he was calm. Cold. Too calm for someone who'd just taken a life. In his backpack, they found a handgun. A ballistics test later confirmed it was the same weapon that killed Ashia. When questioned, Scotland said almost nothing. Just fragments, it wasn't supposed to happen, I didn't mean to, she said something. But investigators could tell from the evidence that this wasn't an accident. Ashia had been shot from behind. No struggle, no hesitation. Execution style. As the case unfolded, detectives combed through her phone records and messages. They found conversations between Ashia and a number listed under a false name. The same number that pinged near the motel at the time of her death. It was Scotland's. The motive remained a mystery. Some speculated robbery, others hatred. But what detectives knew for sure was this: Ashia had trusted him enough to open her door. And for that, she paid with her life. News of the arrest spread quickly through Detroit's LGBTQ+ community. For many, it wasn't just anger, it was heartbreak. Another woman, another life, stolen before her story could unfold. Ashia's friends refused to let her memory be reduced to a statistic. They organized vigils, printed her photos, and demanded justice. Her mother, still reeling from the loss, sat in the front row of every hearing, silent, steady, her grief filling the courtroom like air too heavy to breathe. The boy who killed her didn't seem to understand the weight of what he'd done. He barely looked up. Barely spoke. As if the reality hadn't yet reached him. But soon it would. Because in a city haunted by violence, justice for Ashia Davis was about to take center stage. The courtroom was silent the morning Carlos Lamar Scotland was led inside. He looked smaller than his crime, a 17-year-old boy in oversized prison clothes, wrists bound, eyes vacant. But sitting in the front row, surrounded by candles printed with her daughter's face, was Ashia Davis's mother. And she saw none of that. To her, he wasn't a boy. He was the reason her daughter would never come home. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage placed him at the scene. Ballistics matched his gun to the single bullet that ended Ashia's life. Phone records tied them together. The prosecution called it a cold and deliberate killing. They said Scotland had lured Ashia into a false sense of security, that she opened her door believing she was safe, and in less than 20 minutes, he made sure she'd never see another sunrise. The defense tried to argue otherwise. They spoke of youth, of poor decisions, of a system that had failed him. They painted him as a misguided teenager who didn't understand what he was doing. But no one in that courtroom could forget the image of Ashia's body, found alone in that motel room on the first night of Pride. As the proceedings dragged on, Ashia's friends filled the benches each day. They wore shirts printed with her nickname, Charm, and held one another through every graphic photo, every clinical detail. For them, it wasn't just about punishment. It was about recognition. That Ashia's life mattered. That her death demanded justice. When the moment finally came for the verdict, the judge's voice was heavy with gravity. Carlos Lamar Scotland was found guilty of second-degree murder and felony firearm possession. He was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, plus an additional 2 years for the firearm charge. No parole. No early release. The courtroom exhaled. Some cried. Others simply sat in silence, absorbing the finality of it all. Ashia's mother didn't speak. She just stared straight ahead, tears quietly rolling down her face. For her friends, the pain came with a kind of fury, the kind that burns quietly but never fades. They took to social media, demanding justice not just for Ashia, but for every transgender woman whose story ended the same way. Her name began trending, shared thousands of times with the hashtag Justice for Ashia. But even amid the outrage, there was tenderness. They remembered her kindness. How she'd stop to help someone carry groceries, or how she'd spend her last $20 buying a meal for someone who had less. In those moments, it became clear, Ashia's story wasn't defined by how she died, but by how she lived. Her life became a symbol, of resilience, of hope, of love that defied fear. And in the months after her death, her community made her a promise, that her name would not fade, that her story would not be buried under statistics and silence. So the question that lingers, long after the news fades, is this. How many more lives must be taken before being yourself isn't an act of bravery? Because for Ashia Davis, the fight to live authentically ended far too soon. But her light continues to shine in every person who refuses to dim their truth for anyone. If you found this story powerful, heartbreaking, or eye-opening, take a moment to honor Ashia's memory. Like this video. Share it. Subscribe to Dark Matters True Crime for more stories that reveal the humanity behind the horror. And remember, every story matters, especially the ones the world tries to forget.